Daddy, the angel showed me where Mommy hides her phone at night. He says there are messages you should read. My 7-year-old daughter's innocent words hit me like a freight train at 6:30 on a Tuesday morning. I froze, coffee mug suspended, halfway to my lips as she calmly returned to her cereal, humming the hymn Pastor David had taught the children's choir last Sunday. The same Pastor David who had counseled my wife and me through our rough patch. The same Pastor David who now spent hours alone with my wife for spiritual guidance. The same Pastor David who had somehow known exactly which cabinet contained my hidden bourbon the first time he visited our home, without being told. This wasn't the first time Lily had mentioned her angel. The dreams had started precisely 3 weeks after our first counseling session, right when things between Sarah and me had begun to improve. Or so I'd thought. "What else does this angel tell you, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice light, despite the cold dread pooling in my stomach. Lily shrugged, milk dribbling down her chin. "Lots of things. He knows everything, Daddy. He says Pastor David is special and we should always listen to him." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "But last night he seemed mad at Pastor David. He said sometimes even holy men break promises to heaven." I nodded as if this were perfectly normal breakfast conversation, while my mind raced through increasingly disturbing possibilities. Either my daughter had developed an unnervingly specific imaginary friend, or something far more sinister was happening in our home. "Where does Mommy hide her phone, Lily?" I asked casually, in the hollowed-out Bible on her nightstand. She pronounced each syllable carefully, as if reciting a memorized line. "The angel says the password is your anniversary, backwards." That night, while Sarah was at her 4th prayer meeting of the week, I found exactly what the angel had promised. Dozens of messages between my wife and Pastor David, evolving from spiritual counsel to explicit descriptions of their encounters in his church office, in his car, in our bed while I worked late. But it was the other messages that truly chilled. The ones discussing Lily. She's perfect for what we need. So pure, so receptive. The connection is growing stronger each day. The things she knows. David. It's miraculous. Terrifying sometimes, but miraculous. We've been chosen for something greater. You said it yourself. Some vessels are specially prepared. I replaced the phone exactly as I'd found it, my hands shaking with rage and fear. This wasn't just about an affair. Something was happening to my daughter, something cloaked in religious fervor and secrecy. That night, I began planning. Not just how to leave my unfaithful wife, but how to understand the strange phenomenon affecting my child, and how to destroy the pastor who had invaded our lives with his peculiar brand of spiritual manipulation. Little did I know that I was already too late. The game had begun long before I'd even recognized we were playing. My name is Thomas Wells. 6 months ago, I was a successful software engineer, a loving husband of 12 years, and father to a perfectly ordinary little girl. We lived in Oak Ridge, a prosperous suburb of Minneapolis where people still took Sunday best seriously, and community revolved around Faith Covenant Church, a congregation that had stood for over a century before Pastor David Mercer arrived and transformed it with his charismatic leadership and uncanny insights. Our troubles began, as these things often do, with something small. Arguments about money, schedule conflicts, the quiet resentment that builds when two people stop seeing each other clearly. Sarah suggested counseling, specifically with Pastor David, who had developed a reputation for saving troubled marriages. "He just gets people, Tom," she'd insisted. "It's like he can see right through to your soul." I'd agreed reluctantly. Despite being raised Presbyterian, I'd drifted toward agnosticism in adulthood. But Sarah had found renewed faith when Pastor David arrived 3 years ago, and Lily loved Sunday school, so I went along with it, attending services occasionally, writing checks for building funds, playing the role of the supportive, if somewhat detached husband of a devout woman. Our first counseling session had been unnerving. Pastor David, with his perfect salt and pepper hair and penetrating blue eyes, had known things he shouldn't have. Small details about our courtship, the exact words of a fight we'd had the previous week when we'd been alone in the house, The name of my college girlfriend who'd broken my heart 20 years ago. Sarah must have told you all this, I'd said, uncomfortable with his familiar manner. Sarah has told me very little, actually. He'd replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm just perceptive. For weeks we attended sessions together. Sarah grew increasingly devoted, while I became progressively uneasy. Then came suggestions that Sarah needed additional one-on-one counseling, that Lily would benefit from special mentoring in the children's ministry, that our family had been chosen for particular attention. And then the dreams began. Lily's angel who visited in the night, telling her things no child could know. Secrets between adults, conversations that had happened behind closed doors, the location of missing objects, names of people we'd never mentioned. At first, Sarah had been excited, believing it was a genuine spiritual gift. I'd been skeptical but willing to humor what I assumed was an imaginative phase. Until that Tuesday morning when Lily had directed me to Sarah's hidden phone, and I discovered how far things had actually progressed. The next evening, after confirming the affair, I told Sarah I needed to work late, and instead parked down the street from our house. At 7:45 p.m., Pastor David's black Audi pulled into our driveway, right on schedule according to the text messages I'd photographed. I waited 15 minutes, then walked to our kitchen window. They were in the living room, not even bothering with the pretense of Bible study. Sarah straddled him on the couch, our couch, her head thrown back as his hands roamed beneath her blouse. Neither noticed the shadow passing by the window. I circled to the back of the house and let myself in quietly through the seldom-used sunroom door. From the hallway I could hear their murmured conversation clearly. "Did you check on Lily?" David asked, his voice husky. "She's been asleep for an hour," Sarah replied. "The new medication really helps." Medication? My blood ran cold. There had been no discussion of Lily needing any medication. Good. We need her receptive for tomorrow's session. His voice dropped lower. The connection is strengthening. The odd thing she revealed at our last meeting. Sarah, she described my grandmother's house in perfect detail. A place she's never been that no one has photographed. "I know," Sarah whispered. "It scares me sometimes. But you said this is a blessing. The most precious blessing. A direct channel. Do you realize how rare this is?" There was a rustling of clothing. Now where were we? I'd heard enough. I slipped back out as quietly as I'd entered, my mind racing, to process this new information. They were medicating my daughter. For what purpose? What kind of sessions were they conducting? And how was Lily revealing information she couldn't possibly know? That night I did something I'd never imagined doing. I hid a digital voice recorder in Lily's room, tucked inside her favorite stuffed rabbit. I needed to know what was happening when I wasn't present. The next morning, I suggested to Sarah that I take a day off to spend with Lily. We could go to the zoo, have some daddy-daughter time. It's been too long. Sarah's face flickered with momentary panic before settling into a tight smile. Actually, she has that special children's program at church today. Pastor David has been working with several gifted children. It's really helped her come out of her shell. I didn't know she was in her shell, I said carefully. You haven't been paying attention, Tom. You're always working. The accusation was rich coming from a woman who'd been absent most evenings for prayer meetings. Fine. Tomorrow, then. We'll see. She gets tired after these sessions. I waited until Sarah left with Lily before retrieving the voice recorder. There was nothing unusual on it. Just the sound of my daughter's gentle breathing in sleep. Either the angel hadn't visited, or these communications happened somewhere else. I called in sick to work and followed them to the church, a stately brick building with an impressive steeple that had stood on Oak Ridge's Main Street since 1908. Sarah led Lily in through the main entrance, but instead of leaving as I'd expected, she stayed. I waited 30 minutes before entering, through a side door I knew was usually unlocked. The church was eerily quiet for a weekday morning. No secretary at the front desk, no maintenance staff visible. I moved silently down the hallway toward Pastor David's office, but voices from the sanctuary drew me instead. I eased the heavy wooden door open just enough to peer inside. What I saw made no sense at first. Lily sat cross-legged in the center of a circle formed by candles, with Sarah and Pastor David seated on either side of her. Two other adults I recognized as church elders sat at cardinal points around them. Lily's eyes were closed, her small face unnaturally serene. Pastor David was speaking in a low rhythmic voice, not English, not any language I recognized. "Ask her about the Miller property," one of the elders said. "We need to know if there's documentation." Pastor David nodded and placed his hand on Lily's forehead. "Lily, my special one, can you see the papers? The ones in old Mr. Miller's desk?" My daughter's voice when she answered wasn't her own. It was deeper, measured, with an adult's vocabulary and cadence. "The deed is in the false bottom of the locked drawer. He thinks no one knows of it, but I see all things hidden in darkness." "And the combination?" David pressed. "His first wife's birthday, May 17th, 1963. Lily's head tilted as if listening to something. "But beware. The old man has changed his will again. The church is no longer named." The elder swore under his breath. "After all we've done for him?" "We'll handle it," Pastor David soothed. "Lily, can you tell us who he's chosen instead?" "His nurse. She has been kind to him in ways that bring comfort to an old man." The implications hit me like a physical blow. They were using my daughter to gather information, private, confidential information she couldn't possibly know through normal means, to manipulate financial matters in the church's favor. Whatever was happening, whether genuine supernatural phenomenon or elaborate fraud, they were exploiting a child. My child. I must have made a sound because Pastor David's head snapped up. "Someone's there," he hissed. I didn't wait to be discovered. I slipped back into the hallway and out the side door, my mind reeling with what I'd witnessed. By the time I reached my car, one thing was abundantly clear. I needed to get Lily away from them. Immediately. But it wouldn't be simple. Sarah was fully under David's influence. If I confronted her directly, she'd warn him. If I went to the police, what would I report? That my wife was having an affair with our pastor. Distasteful, but not illegal. That they were conducting strange rituals with my daughter. Without evidence of harm, authorities would likely see it as unusual religious practice, nothing more. No, I needed leverage. Information. Understanding of what exactly was happening to Lily and how they were facilitating it. Drove to our family doctor's office and requested copies of Lily's recent medical records, claiming we were seeking a second opinion for a developing condition. The receptionist, who knew our family well, printed them without question. In the parking lot, I reviewed the files with growing horror. There had indeed been 2 recent appointments I knew nothing about, with prescriptions for a low dose of a medication typically used for ADHD, despite Lily never showing symptoms or receiving such a diagnosis. The prescribing doctor wasn't our regular pediatrician, but a psychiatrist named Dr. Morris who had privileges at the same hospital. A quick search revealed Dr. Jeffrey Morris was a prominent member of Faith Covenant and served on the church board. The pieces were falling into place, but the complete picture remained elusive. Were they medicating Lily to make her more suggestible? Was she genuinely experiencing something supernatural, enhanced by the drugs? Or was this an elaborate hoax with Lily somehow coached to reveal information they'd gathered through other means? I needed more information, and I knew just where to find it. Pastor David kept meticulous records in his church office. If there was documentation about whatever sessions they were conducting with Lily, it would be there. That night, I waited until Sarah was asleep before slipping out. The church's security system was basic, designed more to deter random vandals than determined intruders. As a software engineer with a side interest in security systems, bypassing it was trivial. Pastor David's office was exactly what you'd expect. Tasteful, masculine, with appropriate religious iconography and impressive theological texts lining built-in bookshelves. What wasn't expected was the locked cabinet behind his desk, secured with a digital keypad rather than a standard key. It took me 45 minutes to override the lock using tools I'd brought from home. Inside, I found what I was looking for, and far more than I had bargained for. A leather-bound journal contained detailed notes on Lily's development going back 4 months, well before the dreams had supposedly started. There were records of initial sensitivity tests conducted during Sunday school without parental knowledge, notes on her exceptional receptivity and natural channel abilities, transcripts of information she had revealed during sessions, with annotations about how they had verified its accuracy and used it, but Lily wasn't the first. The cabinet contained similar files on 3 other children from the congregation, dating back to Pastor David's arrival 3 years ago. 2 had eventually been deemed unreliable, or connection degraded. The third, a boy named Elijah, had detailed records until 14 months ago, when the entries abruptly stopped with a cryptic note: channel permanently closed. Family relocated. A quick search on my phone revealed that Elijah James had died unexpectedly from complications of a seizure disorder shortly after his family moved to Arizona. He had been 9 years old. My hands trembled as I photographed page after page of the records. This wasn't just spiritual manipulation or exploitation. This was methodical experimentation on children with potentially deadly consequences. But the most disturbing discovery came in a hidden compartment at the back of the cabinet, a small ancient-looking book bound in what appeared to be dark leather, its pages brittle with age. The text was handwritten in faded brown ink, in the same unrecognizable language I'd heard Pastor David speaking during Lily's session. Tucked inside was a loose sheet of modern paper with a partial translation. The vessel must be pure and unburdened by knowledge. The sight grows strongest at the threshold of innocence before the mind has learned to close its doors. Prepare the vessel with herbs of opening and quieting. Speak the words of invitation at the hour when the veil thins. The entity will answer, for it hungers for connection to our world. Warning: the vessel may not withstand prolonged connection. When signs of burning appear, sleeplessness, physical tremors, speaking in disjointed tongues, the binding must be severed or the vessel will be consumed. A new vessel must then be prepared. They weren't cultivating a spiritual gift. They were binding my daughter to something, an entity that was using her as a conduit for information. And based on Elijah's fate, the process could be fatal. I carefully replaced everything except the small ancient book which I took with me. They would notice its absence eventually, but I needed time to understand what we were dealing with. As I drove home in the pre-dawn darkness, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Where are you? Lily's having another episode. Keep saying, Daddy's." Taking the book, the angel is angry. Ice flooded my veins. I pulled over, suddenly aware of how cold the car had become despite the summer night. The leather-bound book on the passenger seat seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. For the first time, I confronted the possibility that whatever was happening might be genuinely supernatural and far more dangerous than I had imagined. I told Sarah I'd gone for an early morning run to clear my head and had left my phone behind. She was too preoccupied with Lily's condition to question me deeply. My daughter was feverish and disoriented, murmuring about the angel being divided and weakened. "I've called Pastor David," Sarah informed me, her tone making clear this wasn't up for discussion. "He's coming over to pray with her." "No." The word came out sharper than I intended. "No more pastor. We're taking her to the hospital." "Don't be ridiculous, Tom. She just needs spiritual guidance." "She needs a doctor," I insisted. "Look at her, she's burning up." Our argument was interrupted by Lily's sudden scream. I rushed to her bedroom to find her sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide and unfocused. "It's breaking," she said in that unnatural, adult voice. "The binding is breaking." Her gaze fixed on me with terrifying intensity. "You've taken what isn't yours, Thomas Wells. The knowledge isn't meant for ordinary minds." Sarah gasped behind me. "How does she know what you've done?" I ignored the implication and focused on my daughter. Lily, honey, it's Daddy. You're going to be okay. Her face contorted with an expression no 7-year-old should be capable of, contempt mixed with ancient weariness. Lily sleeps. I speak. Now directly, foolish man. Return what you've taken before the binding shatters completely. Your child cannot survive the sundering. A cold clarity washed over me. I turned to Sarah. How long has this been happening? The voice changes. The knowledge. Of things she couldn't know? Sarah's face crumpled. 4 months. Pastor David said it was a gift, a direct connection to divine wisdom. And you didn't think to question it? To wonder what was really happening to our daughter? He explained everything. Some children are natural vessels. Their souls are pure, enough to channel angelic guidance. It's rare but documented throughout religious history. And the medication? What was that for? She had the grace to look ashamed. To help her stay calm during the connection. It can be intense. It's killing her, Sarah. I pulled Lily's medical file from my bag and thrust it at her. Look at the warning signs. Elevated heart rate, abnormal brain activity, the same pattern that preceded Elijah James's death. What are you talking about? Who's Elijah? Another vessel who died after Pastor David finished with him. Sarah shook her head vehemently. No, that's not true. David is a man of God. David is using our daughter as a tool to gather information. Private, confidential information he's using for the church's financial benefit. I gestured to Lily, who had collapsed back onto her pillows, now eerily still. Look at her, Sarah. Does this look like a divine blessing to you? Before she could answer, the doorbell rang. Pastor David had arrived. Don't let him in, I warned. If you care about Lily at all, don't let that man near her again. But Sarah was already moving toward the door, her faith in her spiritual leader overriding maternal instinct. I made a split-second decision. I scooped Lily into my arms, grabbed the ancient book, and headed for the back door. What are you doing? Sarah cried. You can't take her. She needs help. That's exactly what I'm getting her, I replied, already moving toward my car. Real help, not whatever twisted ritual he's been performing. I managed to secure Lily in the back seat just as Pastor David rounded the corner of the house, his face a mask of righteous concern that didn't reach his calculating eyes. Thomas, he called, approaching with hands outstretched in a gesture of supplication. Let's discuss this rationally. Lily is experiencing a profound spiritual awakening that requires proper guidance. Stay back, I warned, positioning myself between him and the car. I know what you've been doing. I've seen your records, your experiments on children, your vessels that burn out when you're done with them. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face before smoothing into pastoral calm. You're distraught and misinterpreting things you don't understand. Spiritual matters often appear confusing to the untrained observer. I understand enough. You've been using my daughter as a conduit to information you shouldn't have access to. You've manipulated my wife, drugged my child, and conducted rituals that are making her sick. I held up my phone. And I have documentation of all of it. His expression hardened. Think carefully about your next steps, Thomas. You're interfering with matters beyond your comprehension. The entity doesn't release its vessels easily. The casual confirmation of my worst fears stunned me momentarily. You admit it, then? You're not channeling angels but binding my daughter to some thing that feeds you information? Pastor David smiled thinly. Angels, entities, divine messengers. The terminology is unimportant. What matters is the connection to knowledge beyond mortal constraints. Lily was born for this purpose. She's a child, not a tool for your ambitions. She's a natural vessel, the strongest I've found in decades of searching. The entity speaks, clearly through her. His voice softened to the persuasive tone that had likely swayed countless congregants. Think of the good we can do with such knowledge, Thomas. The church has already secured donations and property worth millions because of the insights Lily has provided. At what cost? Elijah died because of your connection. A shadow passed over his face. An unfortunate failure. I miscalculated the strength of the binding, but I've refined the process since then. Lily is stronger. She's dying, I said flatly. And I'm taking her to people who can help her. No hospital can treat what ails her. He took a step closer. Only I can safely sever the connection without harming her. The entity must be properly dismissed or it will tear through her mind as it departs. Like it did with Elijah? His silence was confirmation enough. Give me the book, Thomas, he said finally. It contains the rituals necessary to protect Lily during the separation. Without it, you're condemning her. For a heartbeat, I wavered. What if he was telling the truth? What if my interference made things worse? From the car came Lily's voice. Her real voice, small and frightened. Daddy, don't listen. The angel isn't an angel, it's wearing a mask. That was all I needed to hear. I jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors as Pastor David lunged forward. Sarah appeared behind him, confusion and fear battling across her face. He's lying to you both, David shouted as I started the engine. The entity will punish her for this betrayal, bring her back before it's too late. I drove away from my home, my wife, and the man who had systematically destroyed my family. In the rearview mirror, I could see Sarah collapsing into Pastor David's consoling embrace, still trusting the architect of our nightmare. In the back seat, Lily had fallen unconscious again, her breathing shallow but steady. I had no real plan, beyond putting distance between my daughter and whatever influence Pastor David had established. But I did have one potential resource, a name mentioned repeatedly in the margins of the ancient book. Professor Elizabeth Chen, Department of Religious Studies, University of Minnesota. The university campus was quiet at 7 a.m. I carried Lily, still unconscious, wrapped in a blanket as I searched for the Religious Studies department. Finding Professor Chen's office was easy. Catching her arriving for early office hours was fortunate beyond measure. She was a small woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes that took in my disheveled appearance and the child in my arms with one comprehensive glance. Whatever emergency you're experiencing, the hospital would be more appropriate than my office, she said, unlocking her door. Not if the emergency involves this. I shifted Lily to extract the ancient book from my jacket. I believe my daughter has been ritually bound to an entity by a man using information from this text. Professor Chen's expression sharpened. She took the book with careful hands, examined its cover without opening it, then gestured me inside. Put the child on the couch, she instructed, closing the door behind us. For the next 10 minutes, she examined the book in silence, occasionally murmuring to herself or making notes. Finally, she looked up, her expression grave. Where did you get this? From a pastor who's been using it to conduct rituals with children from his congregation. My daughter. My voice broke. She's been experiencing episodes, speaking in a voice that isn't hers, knowing things she couldn't possibly know. Professor Chen nodded as if this confirmed something. This text is an obscure grimoire, purportedly translated from something much older. It describes a method for creating a conduit between our world and elsewhere, for extracting information through an innocent vessel. She glanced at Lily. A child. Is it real? I mean, is what's happening to her actually supernatural? That depends on your definition of supernatural. The human mind is remarkably susceptible to suggestion, particularly developing minds under the influence of certain substances. She turned a page carefully. The herbs of opening and quieting mentioned here would be interpreted today as psychoactive compounds, some of which have been synthesized into modern pharmaceuticals. She's been given medication, without my knowledge or consent. That's likely part of it, but there's more to these rituals than mere drugging. She studied my face. Mr. Wells, Thomas Wells. Mr. Wells, throughout history, across countless cultures, there have been practices designed to access information through altered states of consciousness. Some call it divination, others channeling or mediumship. Modern science might explain it as tapping into the collective unconscious or even quantum entanglement of consciousness. I don't care what it's called, I said desperately. I just need to know how to stop it, how to help my daughter. The binding described in this text is particularly insidious because it creates a genuine connection, not just a suggestible state. The ritual essentially opens a door in the child's mind and invites something to step through. She looked at Lily with compassion. How long has this been happening? The episode started about 3 months ago, but I've learned they were preparing her before that. And the person conducting these rituals, this pastor, did he explain what entity he was connecting her to? He called it an angel at first to my wife. Later, he just referred to it as the entity. He claimed it was a source of divine wisdom. Professor Chen's expression darkened. There's nothing divine about the being described in this text. It's a parasite of consciousness. It feeds on the mental energy of its host while providing information as a lure to keep the connection open. She closed the book carefully. Your daughter is essentially being consumed from within. The clinical description of Lily's condition hit me like a physical blow. How do I save her? The connection must be severed properly. Abruptly breaking it could be as dangerous as maintaining it. The pastor claimed only he could safely disconnect her. He lied. The ritual is here in the text, though it's complex. It requires understanding of the original binding and precise timing. She studied Lily's pale face. When was her last episode? About an hour ago. She spoke, not in her voice, and then collapsed. That's consistent with the cycle described here. The entity surfaces, communicates, then retreats, gradually taking more of the host's energy each time. She made a decision. I can perform the severance ritual, but we need to move quickly. The longer this connection exists, the more difficult it is to break without permanent damage. Damage? My voice cracked on the word, to her mind. The previous vessels you mentioned, did any of them die? I nodded mutely. Then we have no time to waste. The final stage of consumption is fatal. She gathered papers from her desk. I need supplies from my lab, and we'll need a quiet, secure space. Not here, too many interruptions. We can go to a hotel, I suggested. No. The ritual creates certain disturbances that might attract unwanted attention. She scribbled an address on a piece of paper. My home. Take your daughter there. I'll meet you in an hour with everything we need. As I carried Lily back to the car, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls from Sarah. I finally answered as I was securing Lily in the back seat. Tom, where are you? What have you done? Sarah's voice was frantic. Pastor David says Lily is in danger, that severing the connection improperly could kill her. She's already dying because of what he's done to her, I replied coldly. I've found someone who can help, someone who actually understands what's happening. Please just bring her back. Pastor David has prepared everything for the separation ritual. He says it must be done where the binding was established. A chill ran through me. And where was that exactly? When did you first allow him to perform rituals on our daughter? Sarah's hesitation told me everything. It was to help her, to develop her spiritual gifts. Was it before or after you started sleeping with him, Sarah? Her sharp intake of breath was followed by defensive anger. That has nothing to do with this. David loves Lily like his own child. That's what I'm afraid of, I said grimly. Did he tell you about the other children? About Elijah who died after being connected to this thing? He explained that. Elijah's parents interfered with the process, like you're doing now. Her voice broke. Please, Tom, I'm begging you. Bring her home before it's too late. It was too late the moment you let that man use our daughter as a tool for his ambitions. I ended the call and turned off my phone. I couldn't risk them tracking us. Professor Chen's home was a modest bungalow on a quiet street lined with mature trees. She arrived 15 minutes after we did, carrying 2 canvas bags filled with supplies. How is she? She asked as she unlocked the door. Still unconscious. Her breathing seems more labored. Chen nodded grimly. The entity is drawing more deeply on her life force. We need to act immediately. Inside, she directed me to place Lily on a dining table she had cleared and covered, with a white cloth. From her bags came candles. small bowls of various powders and dried herbs, a silver knife that looked ceremonial rather than practical, and several small bottles of liquids. I need to know exactly when the binding began and what symptoms she's exhibited, she said as she arranged these items in a specific pattern. I related everything I knew about the timeline, the changes in Lily's behavior, the episodes where she spoke with knowledge and vocabulary beyond her years, and the information she revealed. Was it always accurate? As far as I know, yes. They used it to manipulate financial matters for the church, property deals, donations, wills. Chen frowned. That's consistent with how these entities operate. They provide enough accurate information to make their presence valuable to the summoner, creating dependency. She hesitated. There's something else you should understand. These entities don't just share information, they collect it. Every moment connected to your daughter, it has been learning, gathering knowledge about our world through her experiences. For what purpose? Influence. The more they understand about us, the more effectively they can manipulate those who contact them. She began mixing substances in a small bowl. The ritual I'm going to perform will close the doorway in Lily's mind, but it's essential that I know the exact words used in the original binding. They would have been spoken in a language you didn't recognize. I closed my eyes, trying to recall the scene in the church sanctuary. I heard some of it when I witnessed a session. It wasn't English, not any language I recognized. Can you reproduce any of it? Even a few syllables? I attempted to mimic the cadence and sounds I'd heard Pastor David use. Chen's expression grew increasingly troubled. That's what I feared. It's a corrupted form of ancient Sumerian used in certain forbidden texts. The binding is stronger than I initially thought. She looked at me directly. Mr. Wells, I must be honest with you. This severance carries significant risk. In Lily's weakened state, the shock of breaking the connection could cause trauma. What choice do I have? Leaving her connected will kill her eventually. Yes, but you should be prepared for the possibility that she may not be exactly the same afterward. Memories might be affected, certain cognitive functions. The entity has been intertwined with her developing mind for months. The weight of what she was saying pressed down on me like a physical force. Do whatever you have to do, just save her. Chen nodded once, then began the preparation in earnest. She mixed various substances into a paste that she applied to Lily's forehead and temples. She arranged candles in a specific pattern around the table and lit them in a particular sequence, reciting words in what I assumed was the same ancient language Pastor David had used. The air in the room seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. The temperature dropped noticeably despite the summer heat outside. Chen's voice grew in strength and authority as she continued the ritual, no longer the academic, but something more primal, a practitioner of arts far older than the university, where she taught. Lily began to stir, her eyes moving rapidly beneath their lids. Her breathing became erratic. Hold her hands, Chen instructed without breaking her recitation. She must not interfere with the markings. I grasped Lily's small hands in mine just as her body went rigid. Her eyes flew open, but they weren't her eyes anymore. The warm brown had been replaced by a milky, opalescent sheen that reflected the candlelight in disturbing ways. You cannot take what is mine, she said in that terrible adult voice, deeper now and layered with harmonics that made my teeth ache. The vessel was freely given by the mother. The covenant is sealed. Chen never paused in her recitation, but her eyes flickered toward me. I understood her silent message. Keep the entity distracted while she completed the ritual. She wasn't. My wife's to give, I said, maintaining my grip on Lily's hands despite her unnatural strength. A child isn't property to be traded or loaned. Humans have bartered their offspring for favor since time immemorial, the voice mocked. The mother understood the exchange. Knowledge for life force, a fair transaction. There's nothing fair about exploiting a child. I leaned closer, staring into those inhuman eyes while trying to reach my daughter beneath. Lily, if you can hear me, fight this, come back to me. The entity laughed, a sound like glass breaking underfoot. She cannot hear you. She sleeps in the deep places now where I have placed her. Soon she will fade entirely, and the vessel will be mine completely, A cold rage washed through me. You're killing her. I am becoming her, it corrected, as I have become many before. Your kind forgets, but I have walked among you for millennia, wearing children like garments until they wear out. Chen's chanting grew more intense, her movements more precise as she traced symbols on Lily's exposed arms, with a clear liquid that seemed to burn without heat wherever it touched. The entity suddenly realized what was happening. Lily's body convulsed, violently, nearly breaking free of my grip. Stop, it commanded. The severance will destroy her mind. The pastor knows this. Why do you think he warned you? The binding must be dissolved gradually over many days. More lies, Chen said, breaking her recitation momentarily. Hold her steady. We're approaching the critical moment. Lily's body, arched off the table, held down only by my desperate grip on her hands and Chen's firm pressure on her shoulders. The air in the room began to swirl, creating a miniature whirlwind that extinguished several candles. He comes for her, the entity hissed. He will not surrender his favorite vessel. Before I could question this, my phone, which I'd turned back on to take photos of the ritual for evidence, chimed with a text alert, then another, and another in rapid succession. Ignore it, Chen instructed, her concentration never wavering. The entity is attempting to distract us. But a sense of dread compelled me to glance at the screen. Multiple texts from Sarah. We're coming for Lily. David knows where you are. He says if you continue, you'll kill her. Please stop what you're doing. We're 5 minutes away. The final message sent ice through my veins. He always knows where his vessels are. They're coming, I told Chen. The pastor, he's tracked us somehow. It's almost done, she replied grimly. But we cannot be interrupted at this stage. She began the final sequence, her voice rising to a commanding tone as she pressed both hands to Lily's temples. My daughter's body went completely rigid, her back arched at an impossible angle. From her mouth came a sound no human throat should produce, a high, keening wail that seemed to contain multiple voices in agonized chorus. The remaining candles flared to twice their height, casting monstrous shadows across the walls. Get out of my daughter, I growled through clenched teeth. You have no right to her, no claim. I have every right, the entity snarled back. Given by your God's own, servant sealed in ritual and sacrifice. What sacrifice? I demanded, a new horror dawning. The entity's laugh was cruel. Ask your shepherd what happened to the Miller child before this one. Why a healthy boy truly died in his sleep. Why his parents were paid to leave silently. Before I could process this new information, the sound of screeching tires came from outside, followed by car doors slamming. They're here, I warned Chen. And we are done, she replied, making one final gesture as she spoke the last words of the ritual, a command that seemed to reverberate through the room with physical force. Lily's body collapsed onto the table, completely limp. For one terrible moment, I thought we'd lost her. Then she drew a shuddering breath and another. Her eyes fluttered open, her real eyes brown and confused. Daddy? She whispered. My head hurts. Relief flooded through me, so powerful I nearly lost my balance. I'm here, sweetheart. You're going to be okay. Chen quickly began extinguishing candles and gathering her materials. Get her out of sight, she instructed. There's a bedroom down the hall. I'll deal with them. I scooped Lily into my arms and carried her to the indicated room, closing the door just as a pounding began at the front of the house. Professor Chen, Pastor David's voice called. I know Thomas Wales is here with his daughter. This is a family matter that requires immediate resolution. I laid Lily on the bed, kissing her forehead. Stay here, sweetheart. Rest. I'll be right back. The angel is gone, she murmured sleepily. He was scary, Daddy. Not a real angel at all. I know, baby. He can't hurt you anymore. I slipped back into the hallway and moved to where I could see the front door without being seen. Chen had opened it but blocked the entrance with her small but authoritative presence. Pastor Mercer, is it? She said coolly. This is private property and you're disturbing my weekend. Pastor David stood on the porch, Sarah half hidden behind him. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his eyes wild with a fervor that went beyond religious zeal. "You've interfered with a sacred connection," he accused. "A divine channel established under proper spiritual authority." "There was nothing divine about what you did to that child," Chen replied, her academic demeanor hardening into something more formidable. "Binding a young mind to an entity for your personal gain? That's not religion, Pastor. That's exploitation bordering on spiritual abuse. You don't understand what's at stake." His voice dropped to a persuasive murmur. "The knowledge we've gained has transformed our community, saved marriages, rescued failing businesses, prevented tragedies, at the cost of children's minds, their lives." Chen shook her head. "I've studied the text you've been using, Pastor. I know exactly what entity you've been channeling, and it is no angel or divine messenger. Elizabeth, please." He switched tactics, using her first name intimately. "We're both scholars of the mysteries. Surely you recognize the significance of finding a natural vessel as receptive as Lily. The potential for understanding the greater realms. Don't presume to create false kinship between us," Chen cut him off. "I study these texts to protect people from exactly this kind of exploitation." She stood straighter. "The connection has been severed, properly and completely. The child will recover." "Impossible," he breathed, genuine shock crossing his face. "The severance ritual requires—" "I know what it requires," Chen interrupted. "Unlike you, I can actually read the original text, not just a partial translation." His expression darkened. "Where is Thomas? I need to speak with him immediately." That was my cue. I stepped into view, positioning myself beside Chen. "I'm here, but we have nothing to discuss." Sarah pushed forward. "Tom, where's Lily? Is she okay?" "She's resting," I said coldly, "recovering from what you allowed to be done to her." "I was trying to help her develop her gift," Sarah cried. "David explained everything, how special she is, how she was chosen." "She was chosen all right," I replied. "Chosen as a convenient tool for gathering information your boyfriend could use to benefit the church financially." I turned to Pastor David. "How many children before Lily? The files mentioned Elijah James, who coincidentally died after you finished with him. And the Miller child? Was that another vessel that burned out too quickly?" The pastor's face went completely still, a mask slipping into place. "These are serious accusations, Thomas. Accusations that could damage the church's reputation and your daughter's future. I suggest we discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss. I've documented everything. Your files, your ritual book, evidence of you drugging my child without consent. Not to mention your affair with my wife, which creates an additional layer of ethical violations." "It wasn't like that," Sarah protested weakly. "It was exactly like that," I countered. "And now it's over. All of it." Pastor David took a step forward, his voice dropping to a threatening register. "You have no idea what forces you're interfering with. The entity doesn't release its interest easily. Without proper maintenance rituals, there could be consequences for Lily." "Another lie," Chen said firmly. "The connection is completely severed. The entity has no further claim on her." "We'll see," he replied with a cold smile. "Thomas, be reasonable. Bring Lily back to the church. Let me ensure the separation is complete. Then we can discuss terms for moving forward. Custody arrangements, division of assets, church membership." "Church membership?" I laughed incredulously. "You think I'd ever set foot in your church again after what you've done?" "The congregation loves Lily," he said softly. "They've witnessed her gift, benefited from her insights. They'd be devastated to lose their little prophetess." The calculated manipulation in his tone made my skin crawl. This wasn't just about whatever supernatural connection he'd established. It was about control, power, and the adoration of his followers. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath. "I'm taking Lily far away from you and your church. I've already sent copies of all the evidence to my lawyer and to the police with instructions to release everything if anything happens to either of us. Evidence of what exactly? He challenged. Unorthodox religious practices? Spiritual counseling? Nothing illegal has occurred here, Thomas. Administering prescription medication to a minor without parental consent is very illegal, I countered, as is financial fraud using improperly obtained information, not to mention potential involvement in the death of at least one child. His confident expression faltered slightly. You're making dangerous accusations without proof. I have more proof than you realize, I bluffed, hoping to rattle him further, including a recording of you admitting the true nature of these connections and their potential fatal consequences. Sarah gasped, looking at Pastor David with the first glimmer of doubt I'd seen. Fatal? David, you said the process was completely safe. It is when properly managed, he insisted, but the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Sarah, I said, addressing my wife directly for the first time. Whatever you think, you feel for this man, whatever spiritual authority you believe he has, ask yourself this. Why would a true man of God need to drug children to create divine connections? Why would angels require such dangerous methods to communicate? She looked confused, torn between her devotion to her pastor and maternal concern. I don't... Enough, Pastor David snapped. Sarah, wait in the car. Thomas and I need to discuss this man to man. No, she said, surprising all of us. Not until I see Lily. I need to know she's okay. She doesn't want to see either of you right now, I said firmly. She knows what you've done, what you've allowed to be done to her. She's my daughter too, Sarah cried, a fact you conveniently forgot while offering her up as a vessel for your lover's ambitions. My voice was ice. Leave now or I call the police and file for an emergency protection order. Your choice. Pastor David assessed the situation with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to manipulating outcomes to his advantage. He placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder. We should go, he said gently. Thomas is upset. Understandably so. Let's give him time to calm down and consider what's best for Lily. The implicit threat in his words was clear to me, if not to Sarah. This wasn't over. One more thing, I said as they turned to leave. Whatever claims you think your entity still has on my daughter, whatever lingering influence you believe exists, it ends now. Professor Chen has ensured the separation is complete and permanent. For your sake, I hope that's true, Pastor David replied with a final enigmatic smile. Some bonds aren't so easily broken. They retreated to his black Audi, Sarah casting one last desperate look toward the house before sliding into the passenger seat. As they drove away, Chen closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly looking every one of her 60-plus years. That man is dangerous, she said quietly. Not just because of his dabbling in rituals he doesn't fully understand, but because he truly believes in his own authority. Will Lily really be safe now? I asked, the adrenaline of confrontation fading into exhausted concern. The connection is severed, she confirmed. But he's right about one thing, these experiences leave marks. Lily will need support to process what happened to her, and you should be vigilant. Pastor Mercer strikes me as someone who doesn't surrender his interests easily. I nodded, the full weight of our situation settling onto my shoulders. We can't go home. He'll just come back, use Sarah to try to get to Lily. I have colleagues in Arizona, specialists in helping children recover from traumatic spiritual experiences. They run a support center that maintains strict confidentiality. Chen moved to her desk and wrote down a name and number. Call them. Today. They can help arrange temporary housing while Lily stabilizes. And Sarah? I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. She was complicit in all of this. She was manipulated by a master, Chen said gently. That doesn't excuse her choices, but it might help explain them. In my experience, people like your pastor are exceptionally skilled at exploiting vulnerabilities, especially in those seeking spiritual guidance. I took the information she offered, gratitude mingling with grief. How can I ever thank you for what you've done today? By protecting that child, she replied simply. And perhaps, when the time is right, by helping expose what's happening. At Faith Covenant Church. I suspect Lily isn't the only child at risk. The next 3 months passed in a blur of temporary apartments, legal maneuvers, and healing. The specialists in Arizona confirmed what Chen had told us. Lily had been subjected to a combination of psychological manipulation, mild sedatives, and ritualistic suggestion that had created a dissociative state, making her highly susceptible to external influence. Whether the entity had been a genuine supernatural presence or an elaborate fraud perpetrated by Pastor David remained technically unproven, though the therapeutic approach favored the latter explanation. What mattered was that Lily was gradually returning to herself, the nightmares becoming less frequent, the episodes of speaking in that terrible adult voice completely gone. The legal battle was less straightforward. Sarah had initially filed for emergency custody, claiming I had subjected Lily to dangerous alternative treatments without her consent. Pastor David's influence was evident in every allegation, carefully constructed to paint me as an unstable father interfering with legitimate religious expression. But the evidence I'd gathered proved decisive. The documented prescription history, the photographs of Pastor David's files, and most damaging, the voice recording from Lily's room where he and Sarah had discussed medicating her without my knowledge. All of it created a case strong enough that Sarah's attorney eventually advised her to settle. The divorce proceedings moved forward with Sarah granted only supervised visitation until a psychological evaluation could be completed. She had moved in with a church friend, though I suspected she was still seeing Pastor David discreetly. Faith Covenant Church had closed ranks, issuing a statement declaring the allegations against their pastor baseless attacks on religious freedom, while emphasizing their commitment to traditional family values and the spiritual nurturing of children. The irony would have been amusing if the stakes weren't so high. I had taken an extended leave from work, focusing entirely on helping Lily recover while building our case. We were staying in a small rental house on the outskirts of Minneapolis, far enough from Oak Ridge to avoid casual encounters, but close enough to maintain ongoing legal proceedings. On a crisp October evening, as Lily and I were making dinner together, a normal domestic ritual that had become precious in its ordinariness, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Wells?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "My name is Rebecca Miller. You don't know me, but I think we need to talk." The name registered immediately. "Any relation to Elijah Miller?" A sharp intake of breath. "He was my son." "How did you—" "It's a long story," I said carefully, "but it involves Faith Covenant Church and Pastor David Mercer." "I knew it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I knew there was more to Elijah's death than they told us." We arranged to meet the next day at a coffee shop halfway between our locations. After putting Lily to bed, I called Professor Chen to update her on this unexpected development. "The Millers could be crucial witnesses," she said when I'd explained. "If they're willing to speak about their experience, it could help establish a pattern of behavior. If their son truly died because of these rituals, why didn't they speak up sooner?" Chen sighed heavily. "Fear, shame, and often financial incentives to remain silent. The church has considerable resources and grieving parents are vulnerable to both threats and offers of support in exchange for discretion." The following day I arrived at the coffee shop early, choosing a table in the corner with a clear view of the entrance. Rebecca Miller arrived precisely on time, a thin woman in her early 40s with prematurely gray hair and the wary eyes of someone who has learned to expect betrayal. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as she sat down, declining my offer to buy her coffee. "I've been debating whether to reach out to you since I saw the initial court filings. Your name is on the public record for the custody case." "I'm glad you did," I replied. "I think we may have experienced similar situations with Pastor David." She nodded, her hands clasping and unclasping nervously. "My Elijah was 9 when the dream started. Pastor David called them visitations, said Elijah had been chosen as a special messenger, that his pure heart made him receptive to divine guidance." The echoes of what had happened with Lily were chilling. These visitations, did They involve Elijah knowing things he shouldn't have been able to know? Speaking differently? Yes. Her eyes widened slightly. He would sometimes use words, concepts, that no 9-year-old would understand. He knew things about people in the congregation, private things they'd never shared. Pastor David said it was proof of the divine connection. And did he suggest special sessions? Private mentoring? Rebecca's face crumpled. 3 times a week at first, then almost daily. He said Elijah needed consistent guidance to develop his gift properly. My husband Robert was skeptical initially, but Pastor David was so convincing, so certain. He showed us religious texts describing similar child prophets throughout history. Did they give Elijah any medication to help him stay calm during these sessions? She froze, coffee cup halfway to her lips. How could you possibly know that? Because they did the same thing to my daughter, I said quietly, under the guise of helping her connect more clearly. They told us it was a natural supplement, she whispered. Herbal. Something to help quiet his active mind so he could hear the divine messages more clearly. When did you start to worry? To suspect something was wrong? Rebecca set down her cup, her hands trembling. About 4 months in, Elijah started having seizures, small ones at first, moments where he'd stare into space unresponsive, then more severe episodes. The doctor couldn't find a physical cause. A cold dread settled in my stomach. What did Pastor David say about the seizures? That they were a sign of the deepening connection, that sometimes the human vessel struggles to contain divine energy. She laughed bitterly. We believed him. Even when Elijah started losing weight, having night terrors, speaking about the thing inside that was eating him from within. I'm so sorry, I said, inadequate words for such a monstrous experience. The night Elijah died, Pastor David was at our house. He said the connection had reached a critical phase that required his guidance. Her voice became mechanical, detached, as if this was the only way she could relate the horror. Robert and I were instructed to wait downstairs while he performed what he called a strengthening ritual in Elijah's room. We heard noises, chanting, Elijah crying out. She paused, collecting herself with visible effort. When we were finally allowed upstairs, Elijah was unconscious. Pastor David said he had traveled too deeply into the spiritual realm and needed rest. He assured us this was normal, expected even, that Elijah would wake with even greater gifts. I could barely bring myself to ask. But he didn't wake up. No. A single tear traced down her cheek. By morning, he was gone. The official cause was listed as an unexplained seizure. The autopsy found traces of sedatives in his system, but Pastor David had documentation, forged I now believe, showing these were prescribed medications we had consented to. And afterward, what did the church do? They were very generous, she said, the words coming with difficulty. Covered all funeral expenses, offered grief counseling. 3 months later, Pastor David approached us about a fresh start. The church had connections in Arizona, a job for Robert, a lovely home, a generous relocation package. All we had to do was sign some papers. Non-disclosure agreements, I guessed. She nodded. We were still in shock, still grieving. The idea of leaving the place where Elijah had died seemed like a blessing. So we signed, took the money, tried to rebuild our lives. What changed? Why reach out now after all this time? I saw your court filings, she repeated. The allegations about rituals involving children. Something broke inside me, the wall of denial I'd built. Robert and I separated last year. He couldn't bear to discuss what happened, wanted to move forward as Pastor David had instructed. But I can't stay silent anymore, not if other children are at risk. She reached into her purse and withdrew a slim journal. I kept a record of everything, the changes in Elijah, the sessions, the medications, everything Pastor David told us. I thought someday it might help me make sense of what happened. Now I think it might help you protect your daughter. I accepted the journal, understanding its value as both evidence and the painful chronicle of a mother's loss. "Will you testify?" I asked. "If this goes to trial?" "The NDA is unenforceable if it conceals criminal activity," I finished for her. "Administering unprescribed medication to a minor, potential involvement in a death, those override any confidentiality agreement." She considered this, fear and resolve battling across her features. "If it would help save another child from what happened to Elijah? Yes, I'll testify." As we parted ways, Rebecca gripped my arm with surprising strength. "Watch your daughter closely, Mr. Wells. Even after Elijah was gone, there were incidents. Things moving in the house, electronics malfunctioning, dreams so vivid they felt like visitations." Her eyes held mine. "Pastor David insisted it was just our grief playing tricks on us. But I've always wondered if whatever connected to Elijah didn't fully let go when he died." Her warning followed me home like a shadow, rekindling fears I'd begun to dismiss as Lily's recovery progressed. That night, I checked on her repeatedly, watching her peaceful sleep with a vigilance born of renewed anxiety. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of Lily's voice coming through the baby monitor I'd reinstalled as a precaution. She appeared to be having a conversation, her words too muffled to make out clearly. I rushed to her room, heart pounding. She was sitting up in bed, facing the darkened window, speaking softly. "Lily?" I called from the doorway, not wanting to startle her. She turned, her expression puzzled rather than frightened. "Daddy? There's a boy here. He says his name is Elijah and that he's sorry. The chill that ran through me had nothing to do with the October night." "There's no one here, sweetheart. You were dreaming." "No, he was right there." She pointed to the empty space by her window. "He said to tell you that it isn't gone, just waiting. That Pastor David made promises he can't take back." Her small face scrunched in concentration. "He said we need to be careful because the door is still open a little bit." I crossed to her bed and gathered her into my arms, my mind racing between rational explanations. She'd overheard my phone conversation, was processing trauma through dreams, and the terrifying possibility that something lingered from her ordeal, some connection not fully severed. "It's okay, baby," I soothed. "Everything's going to be okay." But as I held her, looking over her shoulder at the empty corner where she'd indicated Elijah had stood, I wasn't certain of that at all. Whatever Pastor David had initiated, whatever he had invited into our lives through my innocent daughter, I was beginning to understand it might not be so easily banished. The next morning I called Professor Chen and related the night's events. Her long silence after I finished speaking confirmed my worst fears. "The severance ritual should have been complete," she said finally. Unless what? Unless the binding was more complex than I realized. Pastor Mercer has had years to refine these rituals, possibly combining elements from different traditions. Her voice grew thoughtful. "Bring Lily to my office this afternoon. I want to check something." That something turned out to be a subtle mark at the nape of Lily's neck, a small, irregular dark spot I'd always assumed was a birthmark. Under Chen's magnifying glass, it revealed a more deliberate pattern. "This is a binding sigil," Chen explained, her expression grave. "Physically inscribed on the vessel to create a permanent anchor for the entity." "Are you saying he branded my daughter?" Horror and rage surged through me in equal measure. Something more sophisticated. This would have been created using a special ink during one of their sessions, likely while she was sedated. "It's why the connection hasn't fully broken despite our ritual." "Can you remove it?" Chen shook her head. "Not in the conventional sense. It's not just a physical mark, but a spiritual tether. Breaking it requires more than the severance ritual we performed. Then what do we do? I won't let that thing reconnect with her. There's an older ritual, more dangerous but more complete. It requires returning to where the original binding took place and essentially closing the doorway from that side." She met my eyes directly. "You would need to confront Pastor Mercer on his own territory." "The church," I said flatly. where he has all the power and influence. Yes, and you would need an object of significance from the original binding, something that was present during the first ritual that established the connection. I thought of the files I'd seen, the ancient book I'd taken. Would his ritual book qualify? Potentially, yes, especially if it was present during Lily's first binding. The implications were clear. To fully free Lily, I would need to return to Faith Covenant Church, confront Pastor David, and perform another ritual, all while on his home ground, surrounded by his devoted followers. This isn't just about Lily anymore, I said slowly. Based on what Rebecca Miller told me and the files I found, he's been doing this for years, using children, discarding them when they burn out. There will be others after Lily if he isn't stopped. Chen nodded solemnly. That's very likely true. But your primary responsibility is to your daughter. Once she's fully protected, then you can consider the broader implications. What if I can accomplish both? A plan was forming in my mind. Dangerous, potentially disastrous, but necessary. What if we perform this ritual during Sunday service, when the entire congregation is present to witness whatever happens? That would be extremely risky, Chen cautioned. Not just physically dangerous, but spiritually volatile. Closing this kind of doorway creates disturbances, manifestations sometimes. Good, I said grimly. Let them see exactly what their beloved pastor has been inviting into their church. Let them witness firsthand what he's been connecting their children to. Chen studied me for a long moment. You understand this could backfire spectacularly, that you could be arrested, lose custody of Lily, be discredited entirely? I understand the risks, but I also understand what's at stake. I looked at Lily, who was quietly coloring in the corner of Chen's office, blissfully unaware of our discussion. No more children should suffer what she has, what Elijah did. After a long moment, Chen nodded. Very well. We have 3 days until Sunday. We'll need to prepare thoroughly, and you'll need allies, people willing to stand with you when the moment comes. I know exactly who to call, I said, thinking of Rebecca Miller and the other names I'd found in Pastor David's files. Parents of children who had been chosen and then discarded when they were no longer useful. It was time to gather the broken pieces Pastor David had left in his wake, to transform isolated victims into a unified force strong enough to close the door he had opened and end his predatory practices once and for all. 3 days later, I walked into Faith Covenant Church for what I hoped would be the final time, Lily's small hand clutched tightly in mine. Professor Chen followed discreetly behind us, carrying an inconspicuous tote bag containing everything we would need. Rebecca Miller and 2 other sets of parents, the Andersons and the Kaplans, whose children had been previous vessels, entered separately, positioning themselves strategically throughout the sanctuary. The service was already underway, Pastor David resplendent at the pulpit in his tailored suit, his voice rising and falling with practiced cadence as he spoke about divine wisdom and special revelation. Sarah sat in the front row, her posture stiff and uncomfortable. She hadn't seen Lily since our confrontation at Chen's house, her visitation temporarily suspended pending psychological evaluation. We slipped into a pew near the back, but not unnoticed. Whispers rippled through the congregation, the estranged husband, the contested child, returning unexpectedly. Pastor David faltered mid-sentence as he spotted us, his eyes narrowing briefly before his professional mask slipped back into place. Brothers and sisters, he recovered smoothly. Let us welcome all who join us today, especially those returning to our fold after absence. God's house is open to all who seek truth. The double meaning in his words was clear to me, if not to his flock. This was a warning, a reminder of his authority in this space. I had chosen the moment carefully, waiting until the service reached the children's message, the point when Pastor David typically invited the younger congregants to the front for a special lesson. As children streamed forward, I nodded to Chen and our allies. Then I stood, still holding Lily's hand. Pastor David, I called out, my voice carrying clearly in the excellent acoustics of the sanctuary. Before you speak to these children, I think their parents deserve to know exactly what you've been doing to the special ones you select for additional guidance. A shockwave of murmurs ran through the congregation. Pastor David's smile never wavered, though his eyes hardened. "Thomas, this is hardly the appropriate time or place for personal grievances," he said smoothly. "Perhaps we could speak privately after service?" "No more private conversations," I replied, moving into the central aisle. "No more secrets. These people deserve to know what happened to Elijah Miller, to Nathan Anderson, to Rebecca Kaplan, to my daughter Lily." The parents I'd named stood up throughout the sanctuary, creating focal points that divided the congregation's attention. They deserve to know about the rituals you perform on children, the medications you administer without proper consent, the entity you bind these children to in exchange for information you use to manipulate church finances. Pastor David's mask slipped further, a flash of genuine alarm crossing his features as he realized this was no impromptu disruption, but a coordinated effort. "These are outrageous accusations," he declared, appealing to his congregation with outstretched arms. "The desperate actions of a man struggling with family difficulties and seeking someone to blame." "Then explain this," Rebecca Miller called out, holding up a prescription bottle. "Medication prescribed to my son by Dr. Jeffrey Morris, who happens to sit on your church board, without any diagnosis or proper evaluation. And this," James Anderson added, holding up a photograph. "My son Nathan, unconscious during what you called a special prayer session, with symbols drawn on his skin identical to those found in ancient Sumerian binding rituals." The congregation's murmurs grew louder, confusion and concern spreading visibly. Sarah had half risen from her seat, her expression torn between loyalty to her pastor and horror at the mounting evidence. "David?" she questioned, loud enough to be heard. "Is any of this true? Pastor David abandoned the